Hey everybody, I got a book here, How to Get a Dollar's Value for a Dollar Spent. And in the book, it just goes into some rather common sense things, like a penny saved is a penny earned, some of those true idioms. A lot of people seem to think that, or some people might think that although Washington is going into gridlock right now, basically the stock market is going to have about 5 years of general uptick. So if you can get on in on that, invest, I highly recommend investing. In many countries, millions of people lives their whole lives in debt slavery because of the high cost of credit. This is particularly true in Latin America and in southern European and Asiatic countries where the peasantry still live on huge feudal estates, pay exorbitant rents, and never get out of debt. We've had some of that sort of thing in the United States within the memory of many living Americans. For example, a coal miner who never succeeded in completely paying off the bill at the company store, or a sharecropper who never managed to balance his account with the plantation owner or with the furnish merchant. But the sensible expansion of credit in our industrial civilization has done a great deal to make pleasant and meaningful and to give hope of advancement to millions who in past times existed like dull clods. The sensible expansion of credit can only occur when the cost of credit is reduced greatly. And that is what it has happened in the US for a while now. And so credit always costs. Whenever you say charge it, you're paying something more in one way or another. You will pay for the same item or service in cash. More than half the time, the additional sum you pay in order to charge it is a good investment, for it is a credit that makes it possible for the American working man or the little merchant or the school teacher to own a home, keep an automobile, be protected by all forms of insurance, have an electric refrigerator, a television receiver, an air conditioner, etc. The flip side to that credit argument, though, is that if you for example, if you have like an $100 bill and you spend, one of the arguments for cash is like if you have a $100 bill and you spend $100 with, if you go get your hair cut and you give $100 to the barber, then the barber can give $100 to the guy that owns the the gas station, and the gas station owner gives $100 to another hairdresser for his wife or something. So like when you spend $100 always spends $100. Whereas when you pay with credit cards, the banks take a fee. So if you spend $100, if you use a credit card and you spend $100 with the barber, then the barber gets like $95, and then the barber spends that with the garage with with the car dealer, or not the car, but like the car. He spends it with people who sell car parts, and then he spends $100 and he spends it on credit, and that $95 becomes $90, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the more people that spend that $100 on credit, the more fees are taken out. Whereas if you just spend $100 in cash, $100 just goes to $100 evenly to everyone. So that's one of the arguments why people still spend money with cash, because over the long term, the $100 still stays $100. And so it goes into the fact that interest rates were not allowed in a lot of places because it says a God-fearing court would have burned people for lending money at interest. And so that's the end of the 15th century. The Merchant of Venice, that was written by Shakespeare. So that goes into the Merchant of Venice goes into that, how he was operating a shop on interest, taking interest and stuff like that. So okay, so there's mortgage credit, consumer credit. It says mortgage credit is the oldest and most respectable form of credit and is understood by the most people. There's a special chapter about it. Consumer credit is the newest form of credit and the most diversified, the most expensive, and possibly does the most to make life agreeable and to influence the short term rise and fall of the national economy. is expensive because it's retail credit. The largest consumer loan would probably be for a $5,000 car, and the smallest a $50 personal loan or $30 installment account. Yeah, so basically it just boils down to the root of all evil is brand new cars. So, I mean, there are some benefit to buying new cars. Like if you buy a new car and then you hand it down to you hand it down to somebody in your family, then they know the exact history of the car. They have every dot and I's and everything. So you can hand down something in good shape that people know exactly what it's been through and can drive it until it's gone. So that's one benefit of buying a new car. But for the most part, new cars are the root of all evil. So especially it's important to build credit. You can just buy a couple things on a business card if you have a business. I recommend starting a business like if you can create an LLC because then you can have a business card and the business card can be used for business expenses and some things can be written off and it builds good credit. You can build pretty good credit that way. If you just buy small, if you're buying small items on like an American Express card or something, that's a really good way in the military to build credit. Create that LLC. Then it goes into the fact of renting versus owning. It says the federal income tax law vastly favors the homeowner over the renter. And so the homeowner can deduct mortgage interest and real estate taxes, while the renter cannot deduct the part of his rent which his landlord pays out in mortgage interest and realty taxes. But Congress could change that at any time. And in periods of deflation, such as the 1930s, and many periods of somewhat stagnant stability, there's no doubt it was cheaper to rent. And that's probably what I think. I think America will probably cycle into a deflationary period because there's an amount of record savings and right now and everybody's preparing for inflation and when people are preparing for inflation they're actually acting in a deflationary manner. So I see a period of deflation actually coming to America specifically. So that'll be good. Maybe renting will be sensible in the future because the problem with buying homes is that we've already hit the point of when you can get the lowest possible interest rate with COVID. Because when COVID first started, the the central banks put the interest rates so low that that was a good time to buy a house because you had low interest rates. You could put down a third. I think that book recommends to put maybe a third or maybe no, well not a third, maybe 20 to 25% of the total home's value should be put down on a down payment, and then build equity that way. I think it has to do with something where if the house gets repossessed, worst case scenario, like there's a repossession on the loan and everything, the house still has equity and stuff. So like I mean they've mentioned there was a different example because we live in different times than Ben Franklin. So, a lot of this stuff that a lot of the stuff that worked in colonial times is a little bit different than today. Um, like for example, the relationship between inflation and deflation was different in those days. So inflation was like, oh, they just printed a bunch of money and that was considered inflation. Whereas nowadays it's a little bit more complex than that, the inflation deflation argument, because you can have you can have inflation coinciding with deflation. Like for example, like if the government is doing, or if the central banks are doing the quantitative easing program, where they're adding a bunch of securities and things like this to the market, then they're expanding all this credit. That's the expansion of credit. That's considered to be an inflationary period. Whereas, at the same time, you can have prices dropping and prices going down because if businesses have more supply than demand or more demand than supply or anything like that, you could have a period where there's inflation and deflation simultaneously. So that's one thing to bear in mind is that it's just the relationship between are things going to go deflationary or inflationary is a lot of it depends on many different factors. Whereas, back in those days, it was just a much more simple, it was a much more simple relationship. It was like, oh, print a bunch of money, that's inflation. Oh, uh, destroy a bunch of money, that's deflation. But it's a little bit more complex than that because even nowadays, the central banks like the Federal Reserve and the Treasury, they can inject a bunch of money into the money supply and they can create more money, and then actually the currency will actually become stronger because there's nowhere that money's flowing, so it can just sort of be stuck with increased growth. So a physician needs a relatively new car, not for the sake of complete. Okay, I think man, the my little my little chi is going crazy. So that was just basically the gist of the book. So invest in your DCP, put at least 3 to 5% in there, and save your money, and don't buy a brand new car, and invest because, like I said, the stock market will probably have 3 to 5 years of expansive growth. And that's pretty much all. I hope you guys enjoyed the video about trying to do your best in with your military money.